Hey everyone, welcome to the most opinionated space podcast on the internet,
Ad Astra, the podcast where we talk about the intersection between space, policy, and technology.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton.
I have a master's of public policy degree with a concentration in science and space policy.
And I'm a PhD in computer science and an all-around tech geek.
You still have time. Newton, what do people still have time for?
They still have time. And by time, we mean 3 days from when this podcast airs.
to submit
to get your designs
in
as soon as you can.
Yeah, you have
We've only got
until
a few more
Saturday
days
night. Saturday night, 11:30 or 11:59 p.m. I was gonna cut you off early, 11:30, 11:59 p.m. and 59 seconds.
And 58 seconds. We're going to be picking the 3 best designs for a t-shirt and putting it up to a vote by you, the listeners. The winner of the contest is going to get to join us on a special segment of the show. They're going to also win a free t-shirt and also have our undying gratitude, as always. So get your entries in. We've seen quite a few good entries so far, so get them in as soon as you can.
Yep, and send them to Ad Astra at elemental.fm by September 30th, and you will be in the running for the first ever, the inaugural Ad Astra t-shirt competition.
So, and once again, another big announcement, as always. More hurricanes have come through over the last week and a half, and have just decimated the Caribbean. There's still people who've been impacted by Florida and Texas who need your donations. They need your money. They need your help. Anything that you can spare or any room that you can give. So check out redcross.org, globalgiving.org, or airbnb.com/disaster to help out. You can go to Red Cross. They have volunteers all over those areas that are on the ground helping out. Global Giving, same thing. And Airbnb is focused on at least putting people up while they're in the midst of these disasters. So make sure to go to each of those sites and donate.
So if you've been busy this last weekend, complaining about the NFL or something, you probably did not realize that 100% of people in Puerto Rico do not have power right now.
Yeah,
that is 100% of people. There are more people in Puerto Rico than there are in Wyoming.
Yeah, so put your patriotism where your mouth is and help.
Yeah, I think I read something that like West Virginia is the same size as Puerto Rico population-wise. Yeah. So imagine all of West Virginia without power. How immediately we would jump on that situation. But go to these websites that we have in the show notes. Give your time, give your money, and give your thoughts and prayers, but mostly money.
Mostly. How about just all money?
You can do the thoughts and prayers thing on Twitter whenever you want, but the money, that's like
only
real
post.
Money.
Only post after you've donated money and helped people all across that part of our country. Because Puerto Rico is a part of our country, guys. I don't know if you remember that, but they are.
They just lack representation, just like a certain district that I have in mind.
We're a little different. So yeah, make sure to give to them. And in other news, Jack, I'll let you handle this one because you threw this on the docket as our first big announcement. NASA has done something to honor the great heroine Katherine Johnson. Why don't you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, so Katherine Johnson, I'm sure many of you are aware of her work. She was the subject of the movie Hidden Figures that came out. Was that earlier this year?
No. That was late 2015, I want to say.
Geez, it was that long ago?
Yeah.
Whenever Hidden Figures came out, it's been a while.
2016 and 2017 have been very long years. I'm pretty sure I aged 50 years between these 2 years.
Yeah. Collectively, I think it's been a couple centuries between the two of us. But anyway, so if you remember in the movie, Katherine Johnson, the protagonist, is a real person who helped John Glenn be the first human in space, or first American in space. And alongside that, she also helped with the Apollo program and the beginning of the space shuttle program. And she has I think it was over 30 years of work that she did with NASA. I mean, she was like the first NASA supercomputer, and she was a person. So she did most of her work when she was at Langley Research Center in Virginia, Hampton, Virginia. And she just turned 99 this last year, and sort of on this with Hidden Figures coming out, with her almost reaching 100 years old, and sort of the push for more representation in space and science, NASA has taken a huge step and named a building after her at the Langley Research Center. It's the newest state-of-the-art research building. I think it focuses specifically on mathematics-based research. But yeah, I mean, this is just like an amazing honor for her. I mean, she's not only had a movie made about her, she's an award-winning computational
yes.
researcher and mathematician. She's just absolutely amazing. Yeah, I'm seeing here it's the Katherine G. Johnson Computational Research Facility. It's the newest building at Langley.
Yeah, I mean, Katherine it was an amazing mathematician. She studied how to use geometry for space travel. That about sums up most of her career. She figured out the paths for the spacecraft to orbit Earth and to land on the moon. You know, after she worked on that mission with Glenn, she focused on helping out with the actual moon mission and getting us to land there. NASA used Katherine's mathematics for a number of missions, and she is still one of the most appreciated folks in the history of the organization. She's an example of why giving people a chance and why diversity matters. I mean, go back and watch. You guys can go back and watch the Hidden Figures movies. And while part of that was dramatized, while pieces and parts may have been a little bit more dramatized, you know, that story as it stands was very real. That the experiences that she faced, the hardships that she faced, and having to be effectively perfect in order to get a place on missions like John Glenn's missions, she had to be utterly perfect. And if she wasn't that way, she would have been immediately thrown off of those missions. This is something that women still face and minorities still face in a lot of different areas. But could you imagine, this is what I always ask people, could you imagine if we would have gone through those missions without the help of Katherine Johnson? Where would we be? Yeah. It was her mathematics that figured this stuff out. It wasn't guaranteed that people could figure this stuff out. Keep in mind, Apollo is still arguably one of the hardest things we've ever done. And it just wasn't a given that we would have actually been successful. So this is what happens when we actually give people a chance and we, you know, for lack of a better term, embrace diversity and are open to people who may not be who are different than us or who come from a different background.
Yeah, I mean, this is what happens when we play more than half the bench.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Katherine Johnson, an amazing hero, winner of the Distinguished Presidential Medal of Freedom back in 2015, has a building dedicated to her, and I'm sure we'll have many, many awards and buildings and all these things named after her in the near future. So yeah, I guess that's sort of our first thing, our good news to start off a pretty hectic week here in Washington. So the first thing that happened in the last week, I guess the first thing I want to touch on at least, is that the Senate passed the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. You've heard us talk about this before. It passed the House with a certain stipulation that Newton, you and I have had trouble coming to grips with, and that stipulation being calling on the Air Force to create a Space Corps.
Right.
So Mike Rogers, congressman from Alabama, big proponent of military space. He has a lot of space interests in his district as well as in his campaign contributions. So part of what he wanted to do with the NDAA on the House side was put money in or at least put in the call for the Air Force to move and consolidate all of their space assets into a Space Corps, akin to the Marine Corps within the Navy. So this was a very interesting move by Rogers, and not taken very well by many people in the academic, defense, and civil space communities, and even in the commercial community, even though you could argue that a Space Corps could mean an increase in the number of launches and the amount of money that commercial could make. There was a hesitation of supporting this. And you see this in the Senate, where fewer senators support this idea. And in the NDAA, the $700 billion NDAA that was passed, there is no stipulation calling on the Air Force to reorganize and form a Space Corps. There is a portion in there dedicated to streamlining the current procedures when it comes to space acquisition, materials acquisition, and launch vehicle acquisition. But then there's also some stipulations in there. It's sort of in the strategic command department, so it also includes cyber and missile defense. There's some more technical duties that the Air Force is going to have to complete, certain reports and reporting that they're going to have to do now. But there will not be a Space Corps if the Senate version, which I have faith that the Senate version will be the final one, they tend to have the final say. They're the deliberative body of the U.S. Congress. So right now, this is the NDAA is going into conference with the House, and they're going to have to resolve some of these issues. And I really don't think that Space Corps is going to be the thing the House is going to be so hung up on keeping that they're going to risk not having an NDAA by the end of the year.
Yeah, it's interesting. Once again, it's not something that I think eventually it will be necessary. I'm not sure how necessary it is right now, and we may be spending time planning for something that we don't really have a full picture of. Is my concern with the Space Corps.
It is a hasty move.
Yeah, it's a bit quick. I think that they're going to have a huge problem with direction once it gets formed. So, I'm interested in seeing where it goes. I just don't think that forming an agency because we go, hey, we got a lot of space stuff. Let's throw all the space stuff together. Like, I don't think that's a good strategy.
Forming an agent or forming a new branch of the military, basically,
I said agency, branch of the military.
To address concerns that we haven't even ironed out are concerns to begin with, is a little premature and a little hasty on the part of Mike Rogers, as well as the various other House members, both on the Democratic and Republican side, that support this measure.
Just having been in the DoD space, I've seen other groups formed because there was a rush by other organizations to go, hey, we're all doing X. We should just have a giant agency or a giant piece of an agency or a department that does X. And there tends to be at least a few years of just kind of spinning your wheels while you're trying to find a direction. Whereas with some of the earlier things we did, including NACA and then eventually NASA, there was a stronger sense of direction. So that's just what concerns me about the Space Corps. I think we eventually will need one. I don't think 2017's the year.
Yeah, well, frankly. Especially because we're only 2 years into the PDSA, the PDSA being the principal DoD space advisor.
Right.
That office has only existed, I think, since it's October 5th, 2015. I had a professor that currently he still works in that office, and that date is ingrained in my mind. Yet we're barely 2 years into already an experimental program to consolidate space. And then on the White House side of the executive branch, the National Space Council, NSPAC, is kicking into high gear. This is something we'll touch on in a little bit. That we don't need a third new entity within the last 2 to 3 years to come in and confuse people and make the situation more complicated. What I would rather see is PDSA continue its growth as an entity within DoD, assess those needs within the agency, within the branch of the military, the Air Force. Whereas on the policy side, you have the National Space Council working on those overarching problems. So space traffic management, debris avoidance, weapons in space, like the really big high level policy debates. And then maybe in 5 to 10 years, we look at developing either a space corps, a space command. I don't think it'll go as far as a space force, but I think there is an inevitability there that we will eventually.
We're decades out from a space force.
Yeah, so
honestly,
I mean, I think it'll happen eventually. You're right, and there's steps we have to take along the way. But those aren't just steps you can take. There has to be a lot of deliberation between them, lest the whole system collapse underneath the weight of new organizational practices, new cultures, conflicting ideologies on what even is wrong with the space domain as it stands. So I think we give PDSA the benefit of the doubt. We have them sort of keeping doing what they're doing. Space or Strategic Command will focus on space and missile defense and the intersection between that and cyber. And then National Space Council will draw out sort of these long-term strategic plans that the Air Force is going to have to, or at least DoD is going to have to address when it comes to national space policy. But that's just me. That's just me.
Maybe I'm on an island though. Yeah, no, I think that all sounds right. So moving on to Trump making a speech in Huntsville and mentioning the National Space Council. What went on there this week?
So in the last week, so I'm going to combine this with the next bit of news because they're both almost newsless. They're just these two things that happened. Both Trump.
Great, they were reporting on them then.
well, so it at least gives us a sense that they're talking about these things. So both President Trump and Vice President Pence went to Huntsville. I mean, as of speaking now, Pence is still in Huntsville, but so both of them went to Huntsville to the Marshall Space Flight Center to give a talk and to rally support behind the National Space Council. Trump specifically called out NASA Space Council and Senator Shelby, the senior senator from Alabama, as being supportive of the space program, of furthering our exploration of the solar system, of furthering development of the Space Launch System. And that's about it. They're in Alabama right now campaigning for Luther Strange, which as of recording this episode will either still be the junior senator from Alabama or will be replaced by his Democratic contender in the runoff election from yesterday, if you're listening to this on Wednesday. So this doesn't give us any indication into when the Space Council is going to meet and what their priorities are, but it does give us a sense that they are talking about this and that it's still a priority for the administration to focus on these issues, especially in the Republican breadbasket that is the South. Maintaining an interest in space is going to keep Alabama in their camp, more so than some other issues, especially in the Huntsville area. I mean, and as we saw, Sessions was just appointed to the Attorney General's office. So Alabama is a powerhouse for the Republican administration right now. So keeping their support is vital to maintaining order in the White House and attempting to, restore order between the White House and Congress. So links in the show notes as to what Trump said and what Pence looked at and probably shouldn't have touched, but still touched. But yeah, so that's I guess all I have from latest from Washington. Oh, except we have one more thing, and Newton,
how could you
found
forget?
This, so I will let you.
How could you forget?
I will let you bring this article up to our listeners.
Okay, all right. So yes, basically there was an article in Space News this week about Buzz Aldrin and Greg Autry sort of replying back to a lot of the worries that there have been about Jim Bridenstine, the Trump pick for the NASA administrator. And basically, they've been saying that it doesn't take a rocket scientist to run NASA. Jim Bridenstine is a leader, regardless of what your party affiliation is, and regardless of some of the things that he may have said that I may or may not agree with. He is a leader, and basically there's a very neat article in Space News this week with Buzz, and that was written by Buzz and Greg Autry, just breaking that down. So just make sure you take a read. I've uttered a lot of these points before about how he is actually an earth sciences advocate. They go as far as saying he's not a climate change denier, which flies in the face of some of his comments. However, once again, he has stated before that we should be studying the climate, which look, this is the best you can hope for. All right,
especially in this administration.
Take the win, okay? That's it.
Yeah,
Jack, what do you think about this?
Let's take the win while we can. I mean, because Trump could have very well put up some Scaramucci-esque real estate lawyer from New York that no one's ever heard of to run the space agency, who utters whatever he wants and changes position with the breeze. But no, the administration picked Bridenstine, probably at the behest of many of the senior advisors, including Bob Walker and Scott Pace, who have been big Bridenstine fans in the past. Yeah, I don't agree with Buzz and Greg that Bridenstine is not a climate change denier. And that he hasn't always been the biggest advocate for earth science, but in recent years he has been. So we have seen sort of this progressive growth in the very classical interpretation of the word progressive. That we've seen this growth from when he first came into office in 2013 after his surprise victory in 2012, and he was climate change denier, full force, trying to get reelected in Oklahoma's 1st district. And since then has sort of eased off the gas pedal and has voted for more funding and more support for the earth science programs. And he has been quoted as saying he believes that the climate is changing, that humans play a factor, and that we just need to be researching it more. Which, if you ask me, if that's how we convince Republicans to support climate change research, I don't care that they're not going to Greenpeace rallies and, signing petitions to the White House calling for, joining the Paris Climate Agreement. If all Republicans who control domestic policy right now if all they do is support earth science in this roundabout manner, I'm fine with that. Sure, there are long-term implications of that, but let's take the win. Let's worry about the bigger fish.
And we've been talking about mostly the earth sciences piece of this, but I mean, if you look at Jim Bridenstine, the nice thing about him is that he actually has the experience in this area, studying this area, looking at the funding for this area, stuff that an administrator needs to be taking a look at. He tends to have a more uniquely balanced approach, and I think Buzz even said this in the article that he rejects that sort of either or battle when it comes to policy and funding that have plagued the space program for the last generation. This is what happens when this is someone who actually has experience in an area that he's going to be leading. The administration has finally made the decision to pick someone who has experience and knowledge in the area that they've been appointed to. Take the win.
Yeah.
This isn't Rick Perry leading energy. Okay, this is someone who's been in this area.
At least Jim Bridenstine can name the agency that he works for or will be working for. So
knows whether or not it has anything to do with nukes.
So I want to sort of nitpick a little bit with this article where it says he's a leader, not a politician. I would say just by definition, Bridenstine is a politician, but that benefits us as a space agency. We need someone at the helm who knows how to talk politics with members of Congress and the White House.
Right.
I think Charlie Bolden was a great administrator and he had the technical qualifications, but sometimes I wish he was a bit more of a politician on things. I'm sure with Bridenstine, I'm going to wish that he understood the science behind it a little bit more, but it's this seesaw that we're on where you have to balance technical know-how and political knowledge.
Exactly. And quite frankly,
yeah,
politics, I've said this in previous weeks, politics is kind of where he's going to get a lot of this stuff done. A lot of the decisions that are going to be made by NASA over the next 4 to 8 years should be fairly strategic. I don't want to over compliment this guy, but because as you said, he is a politician. He does have a lot of interest in promoting himself, but he has a passion for this agency and understands it.
And he has an MBA and a triple major from Rice University with psychology, economics, and business. He is well suited for the strategic planning. I think your use of that word is just on point with what the administrator is going to have to do over the next 4 to 8 years, is all about strategery. I think I don't think we need an administrator right now who is micromanaging every little project. There is times that we need that when it comes down to crunch time, but when we're making these big overarching policy decisions, I think Bridenstine is a good choice. He's not going to muff it up as bad as some people probably could. And then I think it's also worthy to note that Buzz and Greg make allusions to Bridenstine being the natural successor to the legacy that Mike Griffin led. So Mike Griffin, who was under W. Bush, led the program through a very interesting transitional period and set up things like the commercial cargo program. Commercial cargo, COTS is the actual acronym. But yeah, the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services. So anytime you see a SpaceX rocket or an orbital ATK rocket, well, soon to be Northrop Grumman rocket, going to the International Space Station with supplies, you can thank Mike Griffin. Well, you can also thank all the engineers and scientists, but Mike Griffin was the architect of that idea. And I think Bridenstine being a natural successor to that commercial focus with an eye on the strategic planning of the space agency, I think we're in good hands and we need to be worrying about much bigger things.
Yes, I agree. I feel like my life has just become about shutting down nerd outrage.
It's a game of economics, right? It's like I'm gonna get upset about this thing today. I'm not gonna get upset about these like 30 other things that are going on. I only have time for the one thing today.
It feels like I've spent the last couple of years, having something happen, wanting to complain about that thing, but something much worse could be looming, or something much worse could be happening. 2016 election. So I just focus and get in line. This is a win. Take the win.
and here at the Ad Astra podcast, we are taking the win. So on to our space news highlight of the week.
All right.
This is we're almost halfway done with the show, I think.
Yeah. We're getting there.
But yeah, so the big news that we wanted to highlight today was that in a speech to the International Astronautical Conference, the IAC, it's the 38th?
I believe it's is it the 36th or the 38th?
I can't remember. I think it's the 38th, but the International Aeronautical Congress. Let me get that right. Senator Simon Birmingham, a senator from the leading party currently in Australia, announced he's representing the Minister for Industry, Innovation, and Science, where all of Australia's space offices exist, announced that Australia will be implementing and creating their own space agency.
The birth of a new agency. It's a miracle when it happens. It really is.
And it probably will take longer than 9 months. This is going to be a very long-winded process. And this is actually coming a little prematurely. I think the administration there, the Trumbull government, really wanted their space agency announcement to fall in line with a current review of Australia's space industry capabilities, which is supposed to be due in March. But the timing was just perfect for the IAC to be in Adelaide. Australia's hosting, and from all the pictures and everything I've seen, they're doing a fantastic job doing that. That they wanted to sort of keep the spirit and camaraderie happening at IAC up by announcing their new space agency. So before today, they have never really had a space agency. Their space capabilities have always been commercial or defense. Back in the 60s and 70s, they were a prime location. I mean, it's the whole middle of the country's desert flatlands, perfect place to be launching rockets. So throughout the 60s and 70s, they were a test bed for a lot of the suborbital launches, some of the only suborbital launches to launch out of the southern hemisphere in history, with the only other ones really coming out of New Zealand just recently.
Right, yeah. In 1967, they were actually one of the first countries to launch a satellite, and images of astronaut Neil Armstrong's first steps on the moon. They've had they do have a long history in space. They have a space industry that employs over 11,000 people currently, but it'll be interesting to see what they actually decide to do with this. Some of the there's not much information out there on it just yet. Like you said, it was an announcement at the IAC, but the opposition Labour Party has been discussing this for a little while, and has said that such an agency was needed to increase Australia's share of a global space economy from less than 1% of what the government estimates is worth 330 billion. That's what their space economy is worth right now. So,
and only going to grow.
Yeah, exactly. So it's only going to grow. So it'll be interesting to see what comes about with this. I'm here for it. I think that Australia already has great capabilities. Obviously, they have some launch capability for satellites and low Earth orbit things. They have a huge potential to do significant Earth sciences research. There's already a significant amount of climate change research that comes out of Australia. So we'll see going forward. But when it comes to that, what do you think this says about the world's reliance on the U.S. from this standpoint? Doing things like launching your own space agency means that you want to direct a series of space missions, that you want to direct some operations. Obviously it still means that you want to work with other countries as well, but you have to have some long-term mission goals or mission statements. So do you think a part of this, at least a part of this, is them saying that they want to have their own direction, perhaps one that's separate from where the U.S. and to much less of an extent ESA is going right now?
I think because we don't have a lot of information, it's hard to say what their long-term intentions are. But I think it's the intention of any country that invests in an independent space agency, independent of the international community. So you have countries like in Europe, in the European Union, that work with ESA. ESA is a separate organization that draws on the powers of the space agencies of its member states. So Germany has a space agency, but all of its resources really are dedicated to helping ESA. What this is going to allow Australia to do is develop sort of what they want their medium to long range goals to be, and for them to better work with the agencies around the world on these bigger projects. I mean, it's a point of national prestige to say, my country worked on this rocket that got this thing into space that takes this picture or takes this measurement. I mean, and if you break into the human exploration aspect, there's even more prestige there. I mean, right now, the only country that launches humans is Russia, with China having the capabilities, but they haven't done it in about 5 years. I think with this, Australia is trying to to join the upper echelons of the international community and have a space agency and be seated at the table for some of these international dialogues that are happening, especially as the Outer Space Treaty is hitting 50. There's been a lot of talk about whether amending it or getting a new treaty or doubling down on the treaty as we have it. Those conversations that are happening, Australia now has a bigger stake in it, and then has a better bargaining point when talking to the rest of the international community. I think also they have an interest in the economic aspect. I mean, just them alone, sure. $330 billion of untapped resources. If they're able to bring commercial entities to Australia to build launch pads, to build launch services, to build ground control systems, for whether it's for the Australian Space Agency or for space agencies around the globe to use, because as we've said before, there really aren't many monitoring stations or ground control stations in the Southern Hemisphere to begin with. That would put Australia on the map, literally, as a focal point of increasing coverage of the Southern Hemisphere. So I think there's a lot of things at play here. There's the economic aspect. There's the international political aspect. There's the prestige aspect. There's the domestic policy aspect. I think there's just a lot of stuff going on. Also, the Trumbull administration probably wants a win. After sort of a tumultuous couple months in Australia, this would be a very big victory for the party and for that government, and could potentially keep them in power for a few more years. I just think there's a lot of stuff at play here, and I'm just happy to see that Australia is following in the footsteps of New Zealand yet again. I apologize to my friends in Australia. I apologize to all the folks that I just insulted with that. But New Zealand just started their own space agency as well in the last couple decades, and has also started launching. We covered it's the Electron rocket with Rocket Lab is launching out of New Zealand. Australia sees that opportunity and says, okay, if New Zealand can get one company, we can get 10. Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff at play, and good on Australia.
Good on Australia. All right, so for a little bit more news out of Australia, and this heads into our international news section. The head of China's space program confirmed on September 25th that the July failure of the Long March 5 rocket back on July 2nd from the Wenchang Satellite Launch Center, that failure was of the country's largest launch vehicle will actually lead to delays to upcoming lunar missions, including even one that was supposed to return samples. So Tian Yulong, Secretary General of the China National Space Administration, said at the IAC the failure of the Long March 5 on its second mission was ongoing, with no updates on the cause of the failure. That the investigation still hasn't completed, and that it's becoming a bigger challenge for the CSA, for the Chinese Space Agency. So with that said, they are expecting significant delays going forward with their sample return moon missions. The Long March 5 was the largest rocket developed by China to date, with a performance similar to the Delta IV Heavy that the ULA boasts. The rocket's first launch in November 2016 was considered a success, despite some issues with the upper stage that reduced the accuracy of the desired orbit. The next mission was scheduled for this November, the next mission for the Long March 5. And it was supposed to be carrying China's first lunar sample return mission. And it sounds like that is going to get pushed back for quite some time. I'm wondering what this means going forward for China's program if they it's been months since this incident has happened, and the investigation has still not concluded. Now it's not just going to be sort of a linear domino effect as far as pushing missions down the line. They're not finished investigating for 3 months, so the November mission gets pushed till January. I mean, this could be an exponential push of an exponential growth of the delays that are going to occur for this moon mission. And China was still looking to actually go to the moon within the next decade. So what exactly this means for that mission? Do they want to take an even harder push, even with a massive failure like this? We don't know. We'll have to see. China's still they're a bit tight-lipped on that. So
yeah, I think this could very well be a defining moment for the Chinese Space Agency. I mean, both the U.S. and Russia had major accidents in the first few years of their space agency.
Right.
China's not a new space agency, but it is still growing. It's still
and they're making a new push, and the motivation behind the push for the U.S. as well as Russia, obviously was very different than the motivation behind China. China's effectively playing catch up, right? And so, whether or not they want to continue, having this sort of or shooting for this competing this ability to compete with us in space, as opposed to spending money focusing on other methods of competing with us. We'll have to wait and see on that.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is just wait and see. With both Australia and with China, it is a lot of wait and see. I guess before we move on to our, I think what do we have? We have latest in tech, and then we have coming soon to space. So before we do our last two segments, this actually just came out. I'm seeing it on my Twitter right now that Blue Origin has just signed a deal with Mu Space Corps, and this is just announced at the 68th IAC. So I was right, 68th. And so this agreement between Blue Origin and Mu is for the future launch of a geostationary satellite aboard the New Glenn rocket, which is a 2 with an optional third stage rocket named after the late John Glenn. It is going to be Blue Origin's first orbital rocket, and they have already signed agreements with, I think, Intelsat and Eurosat on satellite launches in the near future. So I've heard 2020 is going to be sort of the beginning of the launch of New Glenn, but it's good to see that Blue Origin is breaking in to the Asian market. Mu Space Corps, I think, is based out of, if you give me 2 seconds, it's based out of Thailand. So this sort of opens up a new market for Blue Origin, as well as increases the capabilities of the Taiwanese space.
Thai
is not Taiwanese. Thai, gotcha.
Yes,
it sort of opens up opportunities for the Thai commercial space market.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah.
That's wow. Breaking news.
Well, breaking news for right now on Monday.
Breaking news for now. So Thailand has a future in space. That should be interesting. I'm interested in hearing news going forward. More wait and see. This is what happens when you have major conferences like these. People come with these massive announcements, and then you spend a week trying to figure out what people were thinking and where things are headed. So interesting. All right.
Yeah.
So now on to latest in tech. Just one quick story before we get out of here. So on September 14th, NASA JPL announced that it expected the GRACE satellite, that's the Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment satellite duo, to make its last science observations in November, more than 15 years after their launch. That assessment came after recent problems with one of the twin spacecraft, designated Grace 2. Now, the Grace mission was selected as the second mission under the NASA Earth System Science Pathfinder, or ESSP program, back in May 1997. It was launched in March of 2002, and its purpose was accurately mapping variations in Earth's gravity field. It's a simple task, right? Designed for a nominal mission lifetime of only 5 years, Grace is currently operating in an extended mission phase. So it was launched in 2002, was only supposed to last for 5 years, and then they pushed out the extended mission phase to at least 2015, and here we are 2 years later. Grace consists of two identical spacecraft that fly about 220 kilometers apart in a polar orbit about 500 kilometers above the Earth. Grace maps Earth's gravity field by making accurate measurements of the distance between the two satellites using GPS and a microwave ranging system. It's providing scientists from all over the world an efficient and very cost-effective way to actually map Earth's gravity field with unprecedented accuracy. The results from that mission are yielding crucial information about the distribution and flow of mass within Earth and its surrounding. But there have been a couple of failures recently that caused JPL to want to shut this mission down. Back on September 3rd, one of 20 battery cells aboard the Grace 2 satellite stopped operating due to an age-related issue. It was the 8th battery cell loss on Grace 2 since the twin satellites that composed the Grace mission launched back in 2002. The following day, contact was actually lost with Grace 2. And then back on September 8th, after a number of attempts, the Grace mission operations team at JPL decided that they would be shutting down the mission. They tried to restore communications with the spacecraft and tried to regain control of the actual mission, but they were highly unsuccessful. They were finally able to get an assessment of the satellite's overall health, and they were able to uplink a few commands to Grace 2 to place it in a passive state that will allow it to maintain its current level of fuel up until the end of the actual mission in November. And during that time, Grace 2 will be in full sun, so it will not even need to use it won't need to even use its batteries. So this is the end of that mission, a mission that ran for 15 years when it was only expected to run for 5. And so it's going to go maybe not exactly the way of Cassini. It's not going to get crushed into an extremely tiny version of itself, but it was a mission that granted scientists a ton of data, taught us a lot about different aspects of climate change, from Earth's ice sheets to improving our understanding of the processes responsible for sea level rise and ocean circulation. And to another NASA mission, to another successful national mission, we bid adieu.
Doesn't it just feel like every week there's a new satellite that's plummeting to Earth or Saturn? I feel like there should be an organization dedicated to advocating for more funding on Capitol Hill and within NASA for future space missions.
Yeah, too bad that doesn't exist. That'd be really cool.
So I wonder if you could go to like planetary.org/join and only pay like $4 a month and help create new space missions so that in 15
hey, they're not
years...
paying us. We don't advertise for them.
It is sad to see yet another NASA mission come to an abrupt end. But there are plenty more out there, and there are plenty more in development. Of course, we definitely need the pressure on Congress. So call your member of Congress, call the White House, call everybody you can, and let them know that you care about this issue. Of the many other things that you are calling Congress and the White House about. But yeah, I guess that will sort of wrap up today. We have a couple things in coming soon to space that I wanted to touch on. Two of them are articles in the Space Review. So the first one is the Outer Space Treaty at 30. So Paul Meyer, who is let's see if he's an adjunct professor at Simon Fraser University and a senior fellow at the Simons Foundation in Vancouver, Canada. So Paul talks about what we're going to need from a future outer space treaty, what we need from the current one, and sort of what the world looks like 50 years after the outer space treaty was signed. There's almost going to be no pomp and circumstance on October 10th when this thing turns 50 years old, but maybe there should be. But so that's a really great article that I'm linking below. The other one, our friends over at Explore Mars, Joe Cassidy, Rick Zucker, and Chris Carberry, all on the management team at Explore Mars, argue, there's all this talk about Moon versus Mars. Why not both? And they make a case for developing things like the Deep Space Gateway and just a clear and concise pathway to both Moon and Mars, and we can fit our current budgetary models within that framework and get humans back to the Moon within a reasonable time frame and get humans to our ultimate destination of Mars, which has been the focus for the last 40 years since Apollo ended. It's always been Mars, 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 and we're getting this sort of talk of going back to the Moon. This article very concisely puts out the plan for Moon and Mars. It's not an either or situation.
Imagine that.
Yeah, imagine that. And then I guess the last thing I want to announce for coming soon to space is if you're listening to this on Wednesday, in 2 days, and if you're listening to this on Thursday, in a day, and if you're listening to this on Friday, today, Elon Musk is giving a talk at the IAC in Adelaide, giving an update on SpaceX's interplanetary rocket system, the interplanetary transport system, the ITS. So it's a very ambitious plan that Elon unveiled last year at IAC. This is going to be the update. Of course, going to have awesome graphics and cool sound bites that we'll be using for the next year until they give us the next update. But it is also very good to see that they are actually working on this rocket while also maintaining the course with Falcon Heavy and Falcon 9. Hopefully, we also get some news on Falcon Heavy on the first launch date, but that is yet to be seen. So I guess other than those things, Newton, do you have anything else that's coming soon to space?
I've got nothing else. So,
all right. Well, I guess we're going to end it there. Remember, this is the last episode you are going to hear before the end of the t-shirt competition. You need to put your t-shirt designs in now. Like when you are listening to this, you better be working on your design for our t-shirt. September 30th, 11:59 and 58 seconds p.m. We will close applications. We will close submissions, and we will pick the 3 best designs and put them out for our listeners to vote on. So you can learn more about it at Ad Astra or elemental.fm/Ad Astra shirt, and then send your submissions to Ad Astra at elemental.fm. So I guess with that, I am your host, Jack, as always.
And I'm Newton.
Ad Astra.